I've heard of For Honor since the year it came out, but never looked too much into it, and after doing these videos, I've of course checked out many games that I had previously heard of countless times, to see what they're really about and if they're good. So the same goes with For Honor, and when the game launched, and I didn't even know this until now, it actually had lots of mixed reviews and many complaints actually. Now that was over 7 years ago, and to be honest, it's a Ubisoft title, so you know what game of theirs has ever launched smoothly in the last 10 years or so. You'd be pleased to know, and this is a common pattern I see with these reviews, the game has been improved quite a lot, and to this day it's still fairly popular with new events and updates. So what I say in this video is all based on my up-to-date version of the game, and my experience with it. For anyone that isn't aware, the core gameplay is very melee focused, so no firearms involved. A bit like an Assassin's Creed game, and you can definitely see the resemblance. Again, the same company. It's cool that they wanted to, you know, focus on a more linear melee fighting game, and try something new but similar to that Assassin's Creed combat. It's all set in this medieval world, but what's interesting is that it isn't narrowed down to just knights, which is what I thought it was all those years ago. Again, I'd only heard a little bit of the game. In fact, you can pick between 3 different factions. These are knights, Vikings and samurais, with a set of heroes in each one that differ in what weapons you'll use, and you know, styles of fighting with various abilities as well. I would say it's Ubisoft's most involved melee combat in any game, as in it doesn't just focus on, you know, button mashing. Not saying that every other game does that, but in terms of For Honor, it nails down on that accurate timing and positioning in fights, with you becoming more aware of enemies' fighting styles and ways of attacking. Overall, the strategy is what drives this game, making every fight so different and not all the same, always feeling so intense and, you know, rewarding after you complete it. To be more specific on what you actually do in the combat and the ways to, you know, defeat an enemy, it's a combination of blocking, powering, dodging their attacks, as well as you attacking them yourself. A big aspect of the combat, and something that, you know, hadn't been done this sort of way before, or definitely not this emphasised, is the directional based blocking and attacking. So to block an attack, you have to copy the stance of the opponent, which involves you moving your cursor or joystick in the same direction to block them. Then if you both aren't in the same stance, that's when you can really get in there with a light or heavy attack. I'd say that's the main mechanic, but there's also guard break, which, you know, breaks their guard, and then dodging an attack. So you usually do this when the attack is unblockable, which certain heavier enemy types can have. There's zone attack, which involves pressing light and heavy at the same time to take down multiple enemies in one giant swing. There's some great executions that have brutal animations to them, and you know, this game does so well at that. And this combat truly shines in duel battles rather than, you know, going up against a giant swarm of enemies, because that's when you can really focus, as you know, it could get messy, especially for the new player with loads of people around you, as it's a lot to focus on, so you know, they may just end up swinging the same attack constantly. But all the moves and features differ based on what hero you choose, so some aspects are better depending on the hero, but overall each one is good for a different reason. So I would say the combat does require a lot of skill in the long run, as there's a good amount to remember across the different heroes in terms of, you know, moves and their weaknesses, for example. So take it at your own pace, you know. I'll talk about the learning of the mechanics a little later when I focus on the mission design. Now, in terms of the story of For Honor, it follows this medieval world with a massive rivalry between the 3 factions I mentioned. They all want this dominance and leadership of this land. So what's interesting is that you follow this storyline of each faction that spans across the entire map, with a linear system of missions to progress through until you reach the end. The first chapter being the knights, and then the Vikings, and then the samurais. So you get to explore the different, you know, sections and biomes of this world, whilst learning about each faction's backstory and history as you keep on progressing through. I think it's a great system. I mean, it's cool following each perspective, and you know, seeing how they differ from one another, whilst constantly taking down a bunch of enemies as you go through. As your characters become stronger with, you know, new abilities and moves to learn, it sort of brings me on to the accessibility of the game. For a new player, it may seem a bit overwhelming at first, but the game, you know, slowly teaches you a new area, whether that be a new move or enemy type as you go through each mission. Pretty much each one in a faction storyline is catered towards something new to try, so it doesn't just throw you all in at once, which I, you know, appreciated. And coming off the main campaign, there's still a lot more to the story, because if we look at just the campaign campaign itself, it's quite fairly straightforward. I wouldn't say it goes in, so much depth in terms of how big the scale of it is, but it's still a great story, don't get me wrong. However, there is more to it with the various expansions that have come out over the years. And for a game that came out over 7 years ago, the visuals impressed me a lot, whether that be the cutscenes and their incredible lighting, or the gameplay itself. I mean, they're both stunning. It doesn't trick you with how good the cinematics look or anything, as sometimes Ubisoft has done that in the past, where they look totally different. As I mentioned, you explore the entire world bit by bit with this linear system, so you have a chance to spend a good amount of time in each part of the environment that cover many different biomes to really immerse yourself into it. These biomes, include the snowy areas with giant mountain ranges that have castles on the top of them and plains of ice, or the green forests. Just such diversity for a game that isn't even open world. If anything, the world is quite small. They put a lot of effort into each mission location, and also adding on to that combat, because you can fight enemies on high up ledges or on ice that's cracking underneath you, so it sort of involves the environment in that gameplay. And the same goes with the weather system, which of course changes throughout the game, and it completely changes the mood of the game as well, with lighting and realistic effects. Now, the multiplayer mode is where For Honor is still holding its popularity, it seems like, where lots of people play competitively in various tournaments that have been set up, but there's also a bunch of game modes to play with friends or online, which allows for a lot of fun depending on who you're up against, because people are really good at this game, as you may tell. The game modes themselves could either be large scale and you have to follow a certain objective, or just simple duel battles. For example, Dominion is a 4v4 game mode with the aim of capturing and then holding points as you fight the other team, so a bit like Domination. And then Brawl is a 2v2 mode with duels between two-player teams. The duel game mode is quite self-explanatory, it's just a 1v1 duel mode. And lastly, Skirmish is also a 4v4 mode, but you defeat enemies for points. And I know this review mainly focuses on a solo experience, but I definitely feel like the multiplayer aspect has, kept this game going, especially with the various updates put out. The introduction of new maps and many improvements to complaints players had about certain areas of combat, being abused or too overpowered, so they nerfed them or buffed stats of some weapons and abilities, as well as some bigger updates that are released, like seasonal and yearly updates. Right now it's Year 8 Season 1, and there's been multiple battle passes released to unlock new looks for weapons and gear, emotes, XP and such. As I mentioned, new maps as well, but also limited time game modes. It's still getting a lot of regular updates after so long, which is amazing. Now, the performance wasn't great when For Honor first launched, from what I heard. They've definitely worked on improving it over time, which is what I mentioned at the start, and it's a common theme in lots of Ubisoft titles. I mean, the same with Assassin's Creed Unity and Ghost Recon Breakpoint. So the gameplay is smoother for sure, at least with my experience, but also from what I've heard online, I was on pretty high graphics and the game sort of surprised me with how well it did hold up, as of course the game is quite fast and is always moving, and it's pretty much all combat, so you want the game to be as smooth as possible. Even in multiplayer, the servers hold up pretty well. This was an area where I thought it could have an effect, but it was still consistently smooth for me. It's also an area that they've worked on in terms of matchmaking and latency issues. The bugs are still staying around, it seems like. I mean, nothing major with my experience, but there were a few times when I did encounter some. I wouldn't say it really affected my gameplay and made it unplayable, but they were there, especially with the amount of AI that are in this game. You're bound to, bump into some. And that's where I end my review of For Honor in 2024. I had a lot of fun playing this game. It's been a while since I've played a title that focuses so much on melee combat, so it was a nice switch up, and I'm surprised it's taken me this long because I've always heard about it, but just never got round to it. I mean, that goes for many games, to be honest. Personally, I would fully recommend this game in 2024. I hope this video has helped you come to a conclusion, because of course, for people that didn't really know what the game is about before, it may come off as not their thing, which is fine. It's a different game. I mean, it's quite linear and quite difficult to become very good at, so depending on the type of player you are, maybe it's your thing, and if that is the case, then now is a great time to check it out. If you did enjoy this video, then let me know by tapping that like button below, and if you're a fan of single player games, then that's what this channel primarily focuses on, but there may be the odd multiplayer title like this one, although it's more of a mixture of the two. I have many reviews on a lot of games, and there's a playlist of a series I've done in the description. If you'd like to support the channel by becoming a member at either level 1 or 2 to gain access to many perks, then tap the join button below. Thank you all for the support and watching until the very end. That was For Honor, and bye bye.